Randall King for the Muncie Labor Oral History Project on December 22nd, 2005. Randy, I want to begin by thanking you very much for agreeing to participate in this project, and I'd like to begin by asking you if you would tell me a little bit about your family. What I'm interested in is how you got to good old Muncie, Indiana.
I married a girl from Indianapolis whose mother and father lived in Muncie, and since we was up here almost every weekend, well, eventually I decided to move. It's kind of like cheaper on gas was to relocate to Muncie, so I've been here ever since.
Okay. What year was that?
1970.
Okay, so in '70 you came from Indy?
Yes, sir.
From Indianapolis up to Muncie. How about Indianapolis? How do your family go to Indianapolis?
No, I was going through there driving a truck, and I'd just got discharged from the service.
Oh, okay.
And I was seeking directions, really, and went into a truck stop to ask for directions. And my wife's sister worked there, and that's how I got to. That's how I met my wife. She just happened to come in about that time, and we got to dating whenever I was coming through, and eventually got married.
Okay. What's your if I were to say, where are the roots of your family? Where would that be?
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Okay.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your educational background?
Yes, I went to York Institute, Jamestown, Tennessee, and didn't graduate. Got my GED in the Army. Then I attended some classes, college classes, at the University of Alaska.
Okay. What were you doing in Alaska?
I was in the military.
Oh, in the service. Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir.
When and where did you begin what I'll call your work career?
Well, actually, in Georgia, whenever I got discharged from the service, I started driving a truck, and then, of course, I met my wife and quit that job, and came from Indianapolis back to Muncie then. So eventually, I went to work at a company over on Macedonia. That shortly after I went out to work, went to work there, they went out of business, and so then in the early part of January 1972, I went to work at Broderick.
Okay. At that, tell me a little bit about Broderick's at that time. What were they doing? A little bit about the company from your perspective.
Broderick made all kinds of steel parts for the auto industry, for the heavy equipment industry, for John Deere, Caterpillar, all kind of parts, transmission parts for the trucking industry, as well as the auto industry, a lot of Dana parts, and that was some of our biggest customers.
Tell me a little bit about the jobs that you had at Broderick's. What were they like?
Oh, they was a lot of them was extremely heavy jobs, steel jobs, that they would range anywhere from 3 pounds to 80 pounds. Just strictly a lot of gear jobs that went into transmissions, Dana transmissions, Fuller transmissions for the trucking industry. And a tremendous, our biggest contract actually was with Caterpillar.
Okay.
And we made all kind of farm implement parts, for all kind of the Caterpillars, whatever, heavy road equipment parts.
So when you went there, would it be fair for me to say Broderick was a thriving business in Muncie?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
They was hiring people. They had opened a plant in Kenton, Ohio. They, in our press, on our press parts, they had the big presses at the Kenton plant. They employed probably 300, 350 people in the plant in Kenton on the big press parts. Yeah. And it was absolutely a thriving industry.
Okay. This is around the clock. They had full shifts,
yes,
24 hours?
Had 5 shifts, or had 3 shifts, 6 days a week.
Oh, okay. When did this, as you look back on it now, when did it start to go downhill?
Probably in the early 1980s. We had, at Broderick's, had a lot of politics involved in it. Some of the other companies in the corporation had government contracts, and they put a lot of pressure on the corporate to make sure that jobs were outsourced overseas. In other words, it was a trade-off. We will give you more work at a Pennsylvania plant, but you're going to have to sacrifice some jobs in the Indiana plants. So it really started to go downhill from that point.
Was this, I mean, I want to get back to your leadership role in the union in a minute, but was this pretty apparent to the guys who worked there that this was happening?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Several of the committee people and myself, and certainly some of the officers seen that, because I was constantly in touch with the plant in Pennsylvania. They was also United Steelworkers people, and I knew the president of the local there, so and we talked about it constantly. That we could see the shift, that it was strictly a situation where we'll give you this if we get this kind of situation. And we was kind of stuck in a barrel.
But the average guy on the line probably wouldn't have been aware of that.
No.
Okay.
No.
When and where, and I'm assuming the where is Broderick's, but it may not be, did you get involved in union activity?
Actually, at Broderick, a friend of mine, I'd been there very shortly. As a matter of fact, I was still on probation. And a friend of mine, he resigned as a union steward. And he asked the president of the local to appoint me, which at the time I didn't really want to have anything to do with the job, but I had a lot of friends that worked there, and that I went to school with, so they kind of egged me on, so to speak.
These are guys from Tennessee. The guys from Tennessee.
Sure.
Okay.
And they I decided to go ahead and take that job, and then subsequently I was elected to the negotiating committee and the grievance committee, and so that's actually how I got started.
Okay. Tell me, what kinds of work did you do for the union?
Oh, I've done a lot of work for the international union as well as the local union. Of course, I was responsible for all negotiations.
Okay.
Also, all safety complaints. I helped setting up educational programs for if we had committee people that was going to some kind of committee schools, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And obviously also responsible for the financial end of the union. And it was a pretty demanding job, really.
Okay. In what ways, and I'm looking at this from an organizational standpoint, I'm sure you're aware of this, and I'd like you to tell me a little bit about, in Broderick, how did the union operate? How did it function? How did it work?
Well, we actually had 3 plants at Broderick here in Muncie. We had a machine shop that was separated from the press plant over on Lincoln Street, and then we had the press plant. They made the dies and those things for the press plant, for the machines to run the parts. And then we had the hammer plant that was located on Jackson Street there. And we, my office, so to speak, was in the hammer plant, which was the smallest of the 2, or the 3. And we, I'd do all my correspondence from there, really. It was very interesting.
Okay. I should have asked you this before, but what local was this with the steelworkers?
Oh, local 2045, United Steelworkers.
Okay. During your work career, I guess especially at Broderick, because I'm focusing on that in your leadership position with the union, how would you describe the relationship between management and labor?
When I first went there, it was, it was kind of an odd situation. I personally didn't feel that the leadership in the local, after I got elected to the committees and sat back and looked at it, I really didn't think that the leadership was giving the best, so to speak. But after I got involved, I personally had a good working relationship with the plant superintendents. We had quite honestly, we had some high management real problems. We had people that was put in certain positions that had honestly never been in those kind of positions. And I'm not blaming them for that. It was, we had a person, Mr. Johnson, retired, president of Broderick. Then the vice president of operations, who was obviously going to succeed him, a month or so later passed away. And it put us in a real tough spot, put the corporate in a tough spot, how to select a person, quite honestly, that was never had no experience in the plants, couldn't have told you really a hammer from a press, to tell you the truth, and strictly financial. A good person, but just strictly out of his league.
So do you think that when you started working with the union, that the relationship between labor and management was, I guess I'd say, pretty good, and it went downhill over a period of time?
In some degrees, yes.
Okay.
Because they had brought in some management people that, quite honestly, you couldn't, it was impossible to work with them.
Oh, okay.
Because they was, well, they had been used to a system, and to put it very honestly, they had been used to a system where they would try to settle things in the bars.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And of course, I didn't drink, and that put me at odds that way. And they had vice president at that time of human resources. Quite honestly, I don't know where they got them at, but they would habitually lie to you. You couldn't trust them. And I found that to be very disturbing, because I always was taught that your word is your bond, so to speak. If I gave you my word, I was going to keep it. And those people, quite honestly, you had to watch.
Okay. Were you involved in a fair amount of strike activity?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that.
We struck in 1975, 78, 81. And quite honestly, some people, it seems like every 3 years we would strike. And quite honestly, some people will tell you that's the reason that the company was closed. That's not true at all. I had been off working for the International Union for almost a year. And when I came back, and while I was off, I'd done some snooping around about the corporation and their policies. And I had found out that one of the finest people I ever met was one of the plant superintendents at Robert, a guy named Joseph Andrews, who was super. He had worked there at the time 42 years. And I'd been off working for the International Union. Came back, and I went to see him after a couple of weeks. We had negotiations coming up the next year. And I explained to him that we had a real problem, that I had found out that the corporation in Pennsylvania, when they hired people, if you worked there 5 years and let's say they hired you at 58, you worked there 5 years,
right.
You went ahead and retired, your insurance was paid for life.
Oh, okay.
Well, but in Muncie, Mr. Andrews had worked for the corporation and the company 42 years, but he didn't get his pay. And of course my union people didn't either. So I went to Mr. Andrews and I told him about that. He was unaware of that too. And I told him, I said, now when the negotiations comes up, I make no bones about it. That's the number one issue. I want the insurance paid for the retirees. And I got up and started to leave. He said, you know, Randy, he said, I've agreed and disagreed a lot with you. And he said, with the union. He said, but you're right on that. And so I said, well, I'm going to bank on your help somehow. He said, you'll get it. We struck for it was strictly a one-issue strike. We struck for 175 days. And the corporation had laughed about it. But I had people, say, getting $1,000 a month, but they was paying $290 a month back for their insurance.
Yeah.
And to me, that was grossly wrong.
Yeah.
Well, to make a long story short, on the 168th day, they still wouldn't move. I wouldn't move either. And so they that's when Mr. Andrews in the meeting exploded. And the other plant superintendents did too. So they came back after a couple of 3 hours and we talked. They said, we'll have a meeting at the corporate level. So they came back and agreed to pay 90%. We would pay 10%. But the actual strike was 175 days. It was a useless thing. Like I told them, if you hire a person at Harsco in Pennsylvania, I mean, and I respect that. Those people, though, your management people here deserves the same as they do.
Sure.
But they didn't see it that way.
Okay. Was that the longest strike that you had?
Yes. The longest in the corporate history.
Well, you talked about this as as basically a one-issue strike. Were the other strikes that you had on one issue, or were they multiple issues?
No, they was multiple issue strikes. They had to do in a lot of cases with wages, insurance, pension benefits. When I went there, our pensions was almost non-existent money. And so I had put a lot of emphasis on shifting money from your paycheck, so to speak, that I wanted to see the pension, the people when they retire, they have to live. And I had put a lot of emphasis on the pension issue. And so, you know, a lot of it had to do with pension and insurance.
Okay. By the time you got to the end of this with Broderick's, were the wage and fringe benefit packages pretty good?
Well, it was until they sold in 1985. Then we had taken for the new people, they demanded a 20% reduction, and which we accepted, negotiated that, accepted, and which obviously didn't work, but it turned out to be a con game.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But I mean, these are things that you, in your union capacity, you were aware that these things were going on, and the
yes,
average guy, let's say, working at the company, wasn't aware of this.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
You know, I said the question was how you would describe the relationship between management and labor, and I guess I'm asking you to reflect on this community as much as your time at Broderick. I mean, do you think that the relationship between management and labor in this town has gotten worse over time?
Yes.
Okay.
I was fortunate though. The company in the they had made some drastic changes, and they had brought an individual in from Ohio, and I always he was one of the closest people I ever met. Now, obviously, there were things I didn't want to hear that he'd say, but at least I knew that he'd be honest, very upfront.
The word you used was classiest people?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the classiest people I ever met, and they had hired him to be the Vice President of Human Resources, and he absolutely, from that point on, there was never a strike of progress.
Oh, okay.
And that, because I trusted him and he trusted me, and prior to that, simply the trust had not been there. They tell you one thing and then walk out of the office and, backdoor you, which he wouldn't do. And that had really hurt us a lot. And I think, I always suspected the corporation knew that. Well, I know they did, because talking to some of the people at the corporation, they couldn't believe certain things was going on. And, but whenever they hired the guy, he was a super individual. And like I said, I didn't like some of the things he told me, but that was okay. You can accept that. I knew it was true.
This friend I mentioned who worked at Broderick at the time you were there said that these guys were always wildcatting me. Is that true of the tradition of Broderick?
Yes. It was constantly wildcat strikes every weekend, almost. It would, and they'd almost drove me crazy. Especially the people in Indianapolis, the federal judges and those people had orders back to work.
Oh, okay.
We'd go back to work and work 3 days, and it was out again.
Oh, okay.
But the last 12 or 15 years, we kind of got past that stage.
Okay.
And, I think most of the people realize, it didn't serve any purpose.
Okay.
And we did adopted some new policies that took care of something.
I mean, this is just asking you to look at the time you were a union official at Broderick and looking at other plants and other unions in Muncie. I mean, is it fair to say there was more wildcatting at Broderick than other places?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Why was that?
Well, they would, I don't know, they would do silly things like, one individual as an example. His brother drove a truck. Now, he worked the midnight shift. He was supposed to come in on midnight, but he wound up in Louisiana with his brother, drunk. Well, we worked it out to where, well, when he got back, they fired him. So the people struck.
Oh, okay.
Well, we worked it out that he was to come in on Thursday night. And he was to get a third step, 6 days off. The 6 days was suspended because he was really the only person in that classification who could do the work.
Okay.
So they suspended the 6 days. He comes Thursday night, he didn't show up again. And but the plant superintendent never said anything. But at that point, I went to the guy's home and told him, "Hey, you're going to show up for work." Yeah. So Friday and Saturday, he showed up. But it was stuff like that that really, made you work double time.
I was going to say, you really earned your pay. Yeah. As you look at that period in Muncie's labor history, and you think of guys working at Chevy or guys working at Deere and places like that, how would you compare a job at Broderick's with those other UAW jobs?
Well, the ironic thing is that at Chevrolet Muncie, we basically did the same thing.
Okay.
They also they had their own hammers, made their own parts for the transmissions and things. And so we basically did the same thing that way. And they had some wild dudes too, Oh, geez. And you could look up, and there'd be several people going from Chevrolet Muncie to Broadridge, and then Broadridge going back to Chevrolet Muncie.
Okay.
And so it was like, but they was interchangeable,
Right.
so to speak, because the same old hammer was the same old hammer.
Yeah.
And from that aspect, we was almost interchangeable. But the Borg Warner thing, of course, at the last, one of the biggest contracts we had was with Borg Warner.
Oh, okay.
And we'd worked out an agreement with the local and management at Borg Warner. And, you know, and it saved everybody money because of the transportation costs.
Yeah, right.
And if nothing else. And of course, the quality, if they had a problem in quality, you're 10 or 15 minutes away. And so it really worked out real well.
But when you think of the unions, though, I mean, you were steel workers, they were UAW. Was there any problem with those guys moving back and forth with two different unions?
Well, well, what they would do was they'd be like a couple of guys, hammer operators. They'd work a year or two at my place, and then they got fired.
Okay.
And of course Chevrolet wanted to hire them anyway because their work had picked up.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they'd go over there and work for a year or two, and they get laid off. All of a sudden we'd need them, so they'd come back to our place.
Yeah, okay.
But no, it strictly wasn't a problem with the unions. You know,
Okay.
it was strictly a management thing.
Okay.
That we didn't encourage them to do that. It was just, I guess.
But you could go back and forth between one union and another.
No.
You couldn't.
No.
Okay.
No. It was strictly. I think one guy told me he'd worked at one time or another 5 different times at Chevrolet.
Oh, okay.
And they'd need help, you know. So
Yeah.
everybody knew him, you know,
Right.
and he was a quality worker. I mean, a good operator. And he could make, you know, good parts, so they'd hire him right away. No problem with that.
Would a guy like that carry 2 union cards then?
No,
Okay.
no. He was strictly, once he got hard back in at Chevy, he was a member of the UAW, and that's the way it was.
Okay. But once he went back with you, he was a member of Steelworkers.
Yes.
Oh, okay. What do you think, as you reflect back on your career, what do you think unions have done for the worker?
Oh, there's no doubt that I don't think that in America, historically, I don't think there would be a middle class without unions. I couldn't imagine in the 30s under President Roosevelt, if in the 20s too. I don't think without those great people like Walter Reuther and those people, and you know. And Jimmy Hoffa, quite honestly, and those type people.
Yeah, John L. Lewis.
Yes,
Yeah.
John Lewis. You know, those kind of people actually made the middle class.
Okay.
Because at one time, a high percentage of people was unions, and it was just if you worked in the auto industry, you belonged. If you worked in the steel industry, you belonged.
Right.
And I don't see a middle class without unions.
So is it fair for me to say, and you know, the last thing I want to do is put words in your mouth, but as you reflect back on that period in American history, and you see what's happening now with Delphi, you know, what probably is going to happen with these new contracts with Fords, with GM, that way of life is really ending.
It's ending.
Okay.
It's sad. It's sad because of this. I've gave a lot of thought since I'm retired to the problems. We've got some real serious problems with those issues, and some of the problems I have are just I don't see nobody there that actually represents the middle class, and I see it going from either you have to the have-nots, so to speak. I just cannot believe that nobody represents the middle class. They don't. And the best example I know is when President Roosevelt and Ford got together on the Ford situation back in the 30s. When it amazes me that corporations can be so stupid is to not see that you really what you do is you eliminate the people who can afford to buy your products. Is what you're doing. Well, you can't afford to buy the product if you only make 90 cents a day or whatever. And that's what we've done. And it continues to go that way.
Well, you talk about some of the advantages of unions. In fairness, as you reflect back, are there disadvantages of unions that you can see?
Yes, absolutely. I've gave a lot of thought to that. And at times, I think unions and there are circumstances and times when companies simply can't afford your demands. I mean, and I think you have to be honest enough to sit back and look at that. If they can, there's good times and bad in the industries, and if you're not willing to admit to your own self and be greedy enough, so to speak, and to me, the greed sometimes can get, we talk about greedy corporation presidents or whatever. Now we're talking about greedy union people, but there can be a time when you can actually overburden companies where maybe the timing wasn't right. And you always hope that the company's doing its best during negotiations, but sometimes that just didn't work that way.
Do you think that ever happened when you were negotiating for progress? That you maybe pushed a little bit too far?
Oh, I'm sure I did.
Okay.
I'm sure I did. In hindsight, we could have. The problem was when those situations happened was that we had people that would absolutely lie to you, and you couldn't trust. So you'd get to a position, you had to make a decision, is the person lying to me or not? And on several occasions, we had corporate people that came in and lied. And I complained about one individual that would lie. I think he would lie to his mother. You simply couldn't trust him. So I went to one of my friends in management and told him, we're never going to get an agreement as long as his corporation keeps sending that individual down here. So he in turn used his influence at the corporate level to tell him, look, don't send him back. And because we had made a proposal on something that really didn't mean anything financial to the company. It was strictly a union thing that should the law change, we wanted a paragraph in the contract to cover that. And he wasn't going to do it. And even though he'd agreed to it in a contract in Tennessee, which he said he hadn't, but when I showed him the contract that he had signed, well, then I caught him in a lie, obviously. And so, anyway, they sent a person in from Pennsylvania, and he came in, and the first thing he said is, Randy, I've studied your proposal, and he's weakened.
Okay.
And so and there were 6 things taken off the table in a matter of 3 or 4 minutes. And, and he told me later, he said, I don't know why he comes in and lies that way. And he said, there's no sense in that. And he said, I've told the president of the corporation, you people don't trust him. I said, no. When a person comes in and lies to you flagrantly, right out, I have no trust in the person, even though he may be telling me the truth. I don't know that. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you. You may not like it, but I will be honest with you because it's a credibility thing.
One of the questions I should have asked that doesn't really fit here, but you're the master of knowing how this happens, so I'll ask it in this context. Could you describe a little bit about how the union operated within the plant? I mean, how the representation of the worker and the steward, take that on up to negotiating, and just tell me how a union functioned at a place like Progress.
Well, we had, each departments had stewards, and then we had, in each plant, we had 3 elected grievance committee people. And if a person felt that the contract had been violated, say as an example on a job assignment, he should have been on one machine, but he was put on a different machine. Right. They'd complain to the shop steward, And then the shop steward would go back to the contract and check and see from a seniority basis if that person should have been on that machine. Then they would request a meeting with the foreman, and they couldn't get it resolved. He wouldn't say if there was a pay difference.
Yeah.
If he wouldn't make the pay difference, then we would go ahead and file the grievance verbally. Then we had 3 days to put it in writing, and we'd have what we call the second step meeting on it, then a third step meeting, and then of course the fourth step was arbitration.
Okay. What about when you got to the what I call the really big stuff, you know, on a larger level, and that is, okay, we're going to negotiate a contract?
Well, the company came in one time as an example, and they had a new plant superintendent. So he decides to go down and change all the jobs in production, all the timings on the job, which wasn't his job at all. That was strictly an engineer's job.
Right. Okay.
And the time study people's job. But he decides to do that. Well, obviously we couldn't get together on it. We grieved, and over a period of time, the particular job had cost the people over $5,000. It was on a run on the one machine, and the contract very clearly covered who was to make the assignment or who was to make the changes in the engineering. But he had uniformly went down and changed it. So in negotiations, we took that issue up in negotiations, and we worked out an agreement where the people was going to get paid for it. Okay. And that we very clearly made it known that only engineering could change the timing on the jobs. But he was one of those people who thought he could just uniformly go in and change.
But when you would think of what, to you and to an outsider, are, you know, the big issues, the macro issues, as one might say, of what we're going to ask for in wages, what we're going to ask for in, you know, pensions and insurance and stuff like that, how did that get put together?
We had almost 30 departments. Each department would have an election. They would select their own person. Then what they would do was come to the table. We'd meet almost every night. Put that together. Then we would draw that up. Then we had a negotiating committee from those people only. Now there was 2 exceptions. The bargaining committee chairman and the president, myself, was excluded. Then we would elect 5 other people from those 30-odd departments, department representatives. And five of those people would be on a negotiating committee along with the bargaining committee chairman and myself. But we would go through all of that to determine and try to combine some of the information that applied to each department. Maybe some applied, you know, collectively, some didn't. And when it come down, we'd have to establish priorities. So what we was going to push and what we wasn't going to push.
Okay. So once you had that drawn up, then you would give that to management, and that became the basis of negotiation.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What role at Broderick's did race play in the union activities?
Prior to me going there, unknown to me, it had played a tremendous amount in the trades. I never, I guess, and even when I was on the committee, I never fully understood that. I never seen it. It's kind of like you see it, but you don't see it. And I'd been president for about 3 weeks. And I'd walked in the vending area one morning. They'd posted a job for a machinist trainee. And one of the committee people who got elected from the trades, he hadn't supported me. He supported his person from the trades that I beat in the election. he'd made a comment to one of the other trade people about who was going to get the job. And as I got my coffee and started on, it dawned on me that they had cut a deal with the plant superintendent to hire a guy back as a fully qualified tradesperson, which that wasn't the way they bidded the job. They bidded it as a trainee, and the company had paid for the training for the person, which actually the federal government had paid for it because they'd got the money on the kickback from the feds on the grant.
Yeah.
So I went on and I went back to the contract and researched it. And I kindly waited for a few minutes. And I walked in the plant superintendent's office and I said, what are you doing? And I said, how'd you bid the job? And he said, as a trainee. I said, well, how you going to fill the job? He said, well, me and the union. I said, no, wasn't my question. How are you going to fill the job? He said, well, me and the committeeman down there said, we cut a deal that I'm going to hire this individual back. And I said, no, you're not. I said, look, if you want to hire the individual back, I have no problem with that. But I said, the individual that bidded on the job that has worked in production for 26 years, super individual. And he agreed with that. And I said, I'm going to tell you straight. I said, just because he's African American, and after I'd looked at it, I'd seen there was no African American people in the trades. And I said, that old dog don't hunt with me. Yeah, because, I don't care about your social life. Work is totally different. We're talking about work. And I said, here's an individual who works every day, was one of the finest people I ever met. And I said, it's not going to happen. And he said, okay, he said, I agree. And said, well, he said, we've got problems. I said, I don't care about the problems down there. I said, it's not going to happen. I said, we'll call a meeting with the people in that department, and I'll take care of it. So I went back down to where the committeeman was sitting. And I said, the company can hire the individual if they will hire, but they will not hire him for that job. I said, I expect your resignation in 3 days. And he resigned. And because I wouldn't play that game. I don't believe it's right. I've never thought it's right. Because the person's coming to work to try to better their families. And to me, that, I think for the first time that had really hit me. Because then I started to look around, and see, kind of look over your shoulder and see what. And it had played a real problem. It had been a problem there. It's just that I hadn't seen it.
Oh, okay. Were there any African Americans in leadership positions in the union?
Absolutely.
Okay.
My vice president for 6 years was African American. Super individual. My business agent was Daniel Kelly Jr. He was on the city council.
Sure.
And Dan was my representative. And he was super individual. Very intelligent. Very good individual. And he taught me a lot about the labor movement. And but we had the individual that took the job on the training thing. I put him in charge of the Civil Rights Committee. And he was the chairman of the Civil Rights Committee.
Did you have any recollection of what the breakdown was as far as race at Broderick's? Do they have a lot of African Americans, or
17% of the total union membership was African American.
Okay. Now, my next question, because I'm trying to get at this in this labor history of Muncie too. What about women?
At one time, there was no women that worked there.
Okay.
And I was involved in that. The EOC had came to Muncie, and they wanted to negotiate a set-asides for women, which I was bitterly opposed to. I don't believe in set-asides.
You want to just explain for the tape what a set-aside is?
Well, they wanted to take actually real light-duty jobs and give strictly to females.
Okay.
And the 60 to 80-pound jobs they wanted the males. And I wouldn't, I couldn't go along with that because to me that wasn't fair to anybody. And to me that's like saying, well, we've made a mistake back 50 years ago, but we're going to correct it all at once. Now, I don't think you can do that. Maybe you want to, but it's not fair to everybody else. So they, as a matter of fact, I ended up getting called to international headquarters because I wouldn't give. And of course, Mr. Kelly supported me on it. My boss, union boss, and he was called on the carpet because of it. He didn't agree with it either. And so our director, well, I just told the director, you know, there's certain provisions you can replace me, but I will not negotiate set-asides.
Oh, okay.
So, but I told him, I said, I just hope you're on solid ground because I said, I just don't believe in it. And I said, I want everybody to have the same opportunity. And that don't mean that I'm trying to pick and choose.
Right.
And I said, that's not my place. The contract does that.
Yeah.
And I said, they should have the rights as everybody else. And I think totally, at one time, I think there was 27 women at full capacity worked in both plants.
Okay. Were there ever any women who played leadership roles in the union?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. The kind of final question, and then I want to ask you to add any reflections you want, and then I want to talk a little bit about what happened at the end of Broderick's and what you did after that. But this is a statement that was made to me when I came to Muncie to teach history at Ball State in the late 1960s. This is a person I was in Michigan, and the person said, yeah, you're going to go to Muncie. That's a real union town. Do you think in the late 1960s this was a real union town?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. No question. Hit top. Reflecting back, my vice president was also the Central Labor County president that covered, Delaware County and Henry County, Madison County. At one time, covered 4 counties, and it definitely was a labor town. Because people like J.D. Lewis from the old Westinghouse plant, those people belonged to FLCIO, Central Labor Council. And before big decisions was made on who we would support politically or whatever, we always talked. Even though we may not agree, but at least, there was consensus, and no question it was a labor town.
I'm assuming what you're going to say now, but I have to ask it anyway for the record. I'm assuming you think that's changed.
Oh, absolutely. Why? Well, because all the plant closures of August, all the free trade agreements, which I think has been a disaster for the country before the middle climate. But like moving the Westinghouse plant overseas, those kind of things, and of course, obviously, General Motors. It's been a real heartbreak on Delaware County because they say we're losing population gradually. Well, I can understand that. I do, and it's strictly because of the plants.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point. As Broderick's ended, I want you to tell me a little bit about it. Here you are, you're the president of the union, and this is going to end. I just want you to tell me a little bit about how that happened from your perspective, and then I want you to go on from there and tell me what you did after that happened.
The Broderick closing was a real fiasco, I guess. Broderick's, I'd had several discussions with high management, Broderick's had never tried to, you know, upgrade their equipment.
Oh, okay.
They from the time they bought Harsco Corporation, bought Broderick's in 1955 up until it closed, up until they sold it in 85. They had never paid any money in the plant.
Oh, okay.
To modernize the plant. They were still still taking 4 and 5 person crews to do jobs that they was companies in Chicago doing them with 2 people. They simply would not spend the money to upgrade. That's basically what closed it. Then in 85, when the Goldman Group bought it from Boston, and quite honestly, hindsight, they never had no intention of running the plant. It was strictly tax breaks for them, and you know, they brought in people that wouldn't have known forging from a flagship almost. I mean, they brought in the president of the company that didn't have a clue what forging looks like, and you could tell then that there was even high management that was knowledgeable would tell you there's no way it could that it was going to close. He bought it strictly for a tax write-off, and as a matter of fact, he filed bankruptcy on the company. Then turned around. Harsco, whom he bought the company off of, he filed bankruptcy on that too. He never did pay them off. So it was, it really, as it turned out, was a sham.
This is what, 1985? 85.
They actually closed in 1992.
Oh, okay.
And he had, I guess, took his money and run.
Well, okay. By the time they finally closed, how many guys were working there?
About 350. Then he filed bankruptcy. We was out for a couple of weeks. Then it was probably 160 to 170 returned, and so they, you know, when they actually closed, I think the last production date was like February 28th. Then had a few that stayed for those small jobs that they had to, you know, make sure the customer had. I think like July was the last official date in 1992.
Do you and the other people who were working there at the end still get any benefits out of that?
We're still in the hassle about that. It came to light after I retired that, unknown to anybody, Goldman had never notified anybody. If he did, it was very few, and he didn't notify me. But they had. Right now, we're in the process of. Supposedly, some people got paid off on their pension. Some people didn't. We don't have a clue who did, who didn't. I've been in contact with the Steelworkers International Union and Senator Baez's office to try to find out exactly from the PBGC. When the Goldman Group filed bankruptcy, they turned it over to the PBGC. Unknown to anybody, there were a few people getting the money, but nobody was notified. So we're battling that right now. And it's very complicated because some people could have been getting it for years, and some people passed away. But Goldman never notified anybody, to my knowledge.
That's amazing. Well, when Broderick's closed then in the early 90s, what did you do then?
I went back to driving a truck, long haul, all over the country, for a company out of Kokomo. And I did that up until I retired. Not for that particular company. I then at some point bought my own truck and went used to haul stuff out of Borg Warner
Oh,
to across the border in Canada 5 days a week.
okay.
It finally just got to me.
Okay. How long ago did you give that up?
Last year.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's
Last
not
year.
very long.
No. And it, some of the, and you know, that's, there's, was things there that I've never understood, that the government does, you know, that,
Yeah.
on the tax breaks,
Yeah.
that's hurt us a lot too.
Yeah.
That economically, and that's one of the things that's really hurting us, because companies overseas get huge tax breaks. Actually, it's almost like paying somebody to take your job.
Right.
And I found that out on the Canadian runs, and they, I don't think they like it very well, but you know, it's true.
You belong to the Teamsters when you were doing that?
No,
Okay.
no, I was an independent owner-operator,
Okay.
and for TB&P out of Daleville.
Yeah.
They had the contract, and subsequently, when I gave it up, they give the contract to a Canadian company.
Oh, okay. Huh.
And you know, of course, you know, that's what it was. They, I never understood that, but well.
Is it fair for me to say that as you look back on your career that you really enjoyed your union work at Broderick?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I enjoyed helping people, and I think that was one of the things that I really enjoyed doing.
Yeah. Those are all the formal questions I have, but at the end of all my interviews, I give the interviewee a chance to add anything that he wants. Are there any reflections you'd like to make on the topic that we've been talking about?
Well, it's just that, you know, I don't know how the government, you know, could continue to give companies tax breaks and those kind of things, and bringing in all the illegals into the country to work. I just don't understand, from a national security standpoint, I don't understand how they can continue.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're really saying, and a lot of people have said this to me in interviews I've done, that at some point this has got to change. And I don't know what it's going to take to make the change.
Well, it has to change.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we can't continue to go the way we're going.
Yeah.
Because it's nothing more from a national security standpoint.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much for the interview.
Yes, sir. Yeah.